Yeah, so this is. Yeah, sorry. So I want to tell you the background of Deep Dive a little bit. So this is our 13th summit, South Summit in Madrid. We've had three now in Brazil. I've been lucky enough or unfortunate enough to live all 16 summits. I've been here right at the beginning. And there's so much going on. I know you're only here one day. It's over 3 days. Then we have parties. We have street festivals. We had a little tech market in the main square in the city centre.
You're making me very jealous,
Saturday. Next year, I'm just booking your agenda for next year. There's so much going on, and there's over 600 speakers here. Incredible talent and experience from all over the world that we felt it necessary to create a more intimate, relaxed, calm space where we could just go deeper on some of the issues that you guys touch on stage. And I suppose get to know the person behind the business a little bit better, you know what I mean? And then to share those stories with an audience who maybe can't be here and can't make it to Madrid this year, but are following us from afar. So that's really kind of the backstory around Deep Dive. So welcome to the South Summit podcast, Deep Dive.
Oh, I mean, honestly, I'm really raring to go. It's exciting.
Delighted to have you, Greg. And it's just incredible, the trajectory of Octopus Energy. Oh my God. As a brand, it came on my radar a couple of years back. But looking at it in a bit more detail, the velocity of scale and growth and acceleration is mind-blowing and very inspiring to see it in the sector that it's in, right, in terms of energy transition, which is so urgently needed. But I wanted to kick off just understanding Greg a little better. So can you tell us a little bit of your backstory, where you're from, how you got into entrepreneurship, and eventually how you ended up in the energy industry?
I'd love to. I guess I grew up in a small town in the north of England, and just a sort of fairly industrial area. And but as a kid, I was obsessed by technology. I think I was 11 or 12 when I saved up everything I could to buy a computer. It was one of the very cheap home micros back in the early 80s. And I learned to program it. I bought bits of electronics. There was a guy at a local electronics store that taught me how a transistor worked or how a capacitor. He gave me books that I learned from. And so I was learning to both code, but also about a little bit of the fundamentals of electronics, which is, I just loved it. So I ended up leaving school when I was 16 to write video games.
Wow.
But after a year or two, I went back to university. Went back to school and then to university, where I did economics, and it was quite fun because I kind of forgot to write my final dissertation, and the deadline was looming. And so I wrote some software that churned out charts. And more than half my dissertation was written by software. Anyway, so that was all fun. And I guess, look, I always knew I'd be an entrepreneur. I've never enjoyed being told what to do. And I think part of that is just this kind of always wanting to challenge and say, is there a better way of doing it? And I may not always be right, but I'd rather take that chance of being wrong.
Exactly.
Than do something I'm not sure about.
That kind of gut intuition that overrides fear factor, I guess, if you're kind of bold and brave enough to drop out of school and give it a go, and and then humble enough to come back to university.
Yeah, can I say that thing about bold and brave? It's like, I don't know I'm bold and brave, but in a way, I grew up in a very poor family. My mum and dad got divorced when I was very young, and she had 3 kids, and had very little income. As a result, I've never really worried about not having anything. And I think that can be a strength, because if you haven't got anything to lose, you don't worry about it. And I kind of think, I think about being an entrepreneur is you need to be comfortable risking your own position.
That's incredible, and I suppose with your upbringing, then you were used to being out of your comfort zone. There were uncomfortable elements, whether it was maybe financial stability or whatever else, and it gives you resilience, I guess, to kind of dive into it in the business world when it's nearly not as important. You know what I mean? It's if your background and family are not well, that kind of always overrides anything else that's going on. I guess you probably build this tough skin or resilience in regard to what other people perceive as risk. It doesn't seem so risky.
It also makes you enjoy being resourceful.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
If something's not working, you look at how to fix it.
Yeah.
And so you tinker, and I think it's a great thing.
Yeah. So coming out of university, then, was it straight back into tech for you? Was it building business? There's so much experience there, but get us to come into the world of energy. How did energy environment and energy transition come on your radar?
Oh, very briefly. After university, I spent 4 years at Procter & Gamble in marketing. I kind of I feel it's a bit of an entitled thing to do now, but I thought before I become an entrepreneur, I just want to learn some basics of business. I don't think that's a good reason for people to go getting jobs, so I don't recommend it. And but there you go. That was my naivety. But I think when I was in my 20s, I left P&G and started running a manufacturing business, and then a couple of other companies where there was a bit of tech. But it was really in 2003 that I reached out to someone I'd been at university with, hadn't seen for a long time, with an idea to start a business that might have looked a bit like, today you'd call it building databases in the cloud. I think back then those words weren't so well known. But anyway, so we started building that business, and it ended up becoming quite a big provider of enterprise software. We sold it in 2010, 2011, something like that. And we had the opportunity to think, like, as technologists, which sector in the world can we make the biggest difference through doing what we know best, which is building enterprise software? And energy, right? It's a $2 trillion sector, and it runs on systems that are 2 or 3 decades old and older. And so we kind of had a look at it, and I think when a lot of people looking at fintech, financial services, and they could see the opportunity to use big data and cloud-based platforms to transform customer experience and create new products and services. All of that applied in energy. But on top of that, in energy, you had this kind of external force of climate change. And even then you could see that the entire sector was going to have to change to reduce the impact we have on the climate. As a result, you've got all the fundamentals of fintech and then this huge external imperative. And I thought, like, this is an incredible opportunity. So actually we went to see some energy companies and we said, like, hey, can we build some technology to transform your business? And there were 2 things they said. One set of companies said, we've been doing this for many decades. We know what we're doing. We don't see the opportunity. Thanks very much. Yeah. And by the way, we heard that from companies that had refused to go online in the past. And a lot of those companies ceased to exist. There were other companies that said, hey, look, our job's keeping the lights on. We're very conservative. It sounds interesting, but someone's got to do it first. And that was when we had the kind of insight that we needed to create an energy company as well as a technology company.
Right, okay.
And so we set off on a path where we were building a platform, a scalable platform for energy, really for utilities generally, cloud-based from the beginning, to use AI, to use huge amounts of data, and to have a really harmonious data model. So instead of having loads of bits of software glued together, you just have a single platform, kind of like Shopify for utilities. So we set about building that. At the same time, we set about building Octopus Energy. And the joy of this was that Octopus gave us our own client so we could test the tech, and Kraken, the technology platform, gave us a route to market for every idea that Octopus had. And so the two have been like yin and yang. And today, look, I know that I'm probably jumping too far forward, but very briefly, I'm really proud that we're kind of, we're valued at $9 billion. And about half that is Octopus, and about half that is Kraken.
Brilliant.
So the two have really been important as we grew.
Symbiotic, kind of complementary. That's amazing that getting resistance, obviously, from a very traditional sector, that you kind of went up the value chain to kind of make it happen, you know what I mean? If you don't find, the door isn't open, you find a window, no? You're going
It's
out
a
that
great
direction.
way of putting it.
Yeah, and I guess building credibility within their space. They're like, what the hell do you guys know if you're not generating energy? You know what I mean? How do you know how it's best operated and managed?
I'm just thinking, right, if the door isn't open, you build your own house, right? So,
Excellent.
So,
up the hill, bigger and better.
Exactly, bigger and better.
Yeah, and I guess this is it. And this is, I suppose I mentioned offline before we kicked off, this is a bit of the journey that South Summit has been making as well, that we're extremely conscientious and aware about what's going on in climate, and we just see tech and entrepreneurship as critical, core and center, not complementary, not nice to have, actually just needs to be driving a lot of these transformations, because, it's never been left to government or large corporates. And as you mentioned, bringing the learnings you had from the enterprise technology software company into the energy space, that kind of innovation disruptive transformation process replicates. It's quite similar, no, to disrupt the banks, it is to disrupt the utilities, as it is to disrupt other industries. So I find it fascinating and potentially gave you guys a competitive advantage you might not even have been aware of coming from outside that industry.
Like, genuinely, the people that started Uber weren't from the cab industry.
Yeah.
If they had been, they'd have made decisions early on that would have killed it. Look, the people that started Amazon weren't bookkeepers.
Yeah.
And you look at things like streaming. The people that started the streaming industry literally had to break the law to do it because Napster, because the incumbents worked so hard to defend their completely outmoded business model of selling bits of plastic with music on. And so I think the time and again what you see is that the incumbents have an existing business model which they will do anything to defend.
Yep.
And there's both a kind of cultural aspect and a financial aspect. So the cultural one, if I look at the incumbents in energy, and by the way, it's not just fossil fuel companies, it's the incumbent car makers that currently make petrol cars and maybe struggling to make EVs. If you look at those companies, they're often staffed by brilliant people, brilliant engineers. I marvel at what the oil industry, the achievement of building offshore oil rigs, drilling kilometers and kilometers under the ground, using echoes to find oil and gas, and then somehow steering these drills and extracting phenomenal quantities of it. The engineering is incredible. Unfortunately, a lot of those sort of mindsets are not necessary in a world of, for example, solar power. So if you're asking the people who are so expert at that world, they look at the alternatives and just can't see how they can deliver it. I think the second thing is financial. If your balance sheet is made up of, production lines for manufacturing gearboxes, and we're not going to need gearboxes in EVs, it's really hard to write off all of that asset base.
Yeah, it's painful.
In the amount of time we need this transformation to occur. And if your balance sheet is made up of oil and gas reserves, writing that off is difficult. And so I think, first of all, you've got this cultural and financial reasons that incumbents, even when they want to, they face a lot of challenges in moving into new markets. I think the third one, by the way, is often they don't necessarily know their customers that well. Entrepreneurs are really good at knowing customers. Like, the real magic is understanding what customers want and finding profitable ways to deliver it with your thesis. Whereas I think with incumbents, they often know themselves very well. So if I take energy as an example, when we started our company, we were told no one cares who their energy company is, they just want the lights to come on. And we were told that by the existing energy companies because they'd been used to being an invisible utility. But we actually wanted to be able to engage customers in energy because, one of the incredible things about renewables is when it's sunny and windy, we've got the cheapest power we've ever had. I want people to use as much of their power at those times as they can because that will drive the cost down. But incumbents didn't see that, that customers would want that. Now, it's not that everyone wants that. Among our customer base, about 45% of all the customers who got a smart meter do something to reduce the cost of energy in a smart way. But the magic is by those people doing it, they reduce the demand for energy at times it's less sunny and less windy, meaning that everybody else gets cheaper power because there's less demand at times when supply is short. So you make a more efficient system. But that kind of imagination, if you like, was kind of not something incumbents had got because they'd grown up in a different era. Another example for me would be there are times electricity prices go negative now when it's sunny and windy because we've got more generation than consumption, right? And the incumbent solution to this is to turn off the generation when prices go negative, and we have to pay them to do it. But an alternative solution is we pay people to take that electricity off the system. And what we find when we do this is we get customers who will put on X or Twitter or whatever, my car battery is full, so I'm taking it off the driveway. If you want to come around and charge your car,
Brilliant.
You get free driving, and I get paid for the electricity you use, right? And we just see all these different behaviours. And so I think the joy here is saying, instead of worrying about the intermittency of a renewable generation, which so often is the way incumbents start the process. First of all, let's work out let's embrace the abundance we have at times of high supply.
Yeah, the opportunity that creates and new product development and everything. It's incredible. And don't get me wrong, I said earlier, entrepreneurs and technologists and innovators are, used to kind of bucking trends and creating disruptive transformation by definition. But I think particularly in this sector, it's not to leave everybody else behind, right? So you need a new ecosystem for climate tech type solutions. And I think in the ideal scenario, which seems to be what you guys are doing, you come in with a unique skill set that maybe doesn't exist in the industry to be able to transform that industry, but you're acting as a catalyst, right? So you're actually bringing people on board and bringing people along the journey. I think the days of go fast and break things are well and truly gone. And this is a whole other business. And it is the business that it is, particularly in energy and highly regulated and so urgent. And there are so many different players involved. I think it is critical that we bring everybody on board, but I do see that the tech companies can be that catalyst to accelerate that pace of change and make that happen. So when you guys were kicking off again, it's incredible how much, 20 billion turnover, 54 million accounts on the smart meter. I don't know, it's nearly 3 billion raised. You mentioned the 9 billion valuations. It just gets dizzying. How did you guys have the credibility to fundraise and go into energy production in parallel early on, not coming from the industry? So how did you manage to bring together some of those really important stakeholders that you needed, like the regulator, like getting licenses to produce, getting those big, probably more old school infrastructure investors on board? How did you manage to pull that together as an ecosystem, as outsiders?
Well, first of all, as an entrepreneur, I've always felt that there is no better test of your idea than when you go out and sell to real customers, right? That's how you learn. You don't learn anything while you're sitting in a lab doing, kind of PowerPoints or whatever. And so we really wanted to get into market. We had this idea, and we had to get to market. We actually went to London Business School and put a notice on the notice board that said, if any students want to do the business plan for a disruptive energy company as your final project, we'll pay you to do it, right? And so we paid a few £1,000s to some absolutely brilliant people who had access to all of the research and the professors to help us create our business plan. And that told us we needed, I think, £13 million of investment before we could have the confidence to go and get those licenses and everything else. And it was only when I was introduced to an incredible investor, the founder of Octopus Investments, which is where we got our name from. And they'd invested, they had a big VC fund in the UK. They'd also invested a lot in renewable generation. And so they kind of understood the idea of a tech-based disruptor in energy. And, look, it took me 3 years to find Simon, that investor. But within 5 or 6 weeks of meeting him, we'd agreed a deal.
Wow.
And I think in that case, because we knew we had a big idea and we had to enter these regulated sectors, we couldn't just start with sort of bedroom funding. But when we found the right investor, the speed at which we could grow kind of justified the planning, if you like. I don't have any regrets, but I do have a confession, which is like when we did that original business plan, I didn't have the confidence to go and ask random investors to invest 8-digit sum in a startup that had no proof of concept. And so we did some other stuff. And so we probably lost 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad that what we did do, though, in this case, was start with the right backer, the right investor.
Critical, yeah. That's such a partnership. We can have a whole other podcast on what that means.
Well, 9 years
Find the right
later,
partners, yeah.
he's still
Excellent.
such an ardent backer of our business. Since then, we've raised billions of dollars from other people. But Simon, and the founder of Octopus Investments, is still the person I turn to when I need to talk to someone. And also, they backed us through the COVID, they backed us through the energy crisis. Yeah, they've been incredible supporters.
Not for the faint-hearted, but it sounds like you got the right ally by your side there now for those ups and downs.
Well, as you can probably tell, looking at me, I started the business when I was in my 40s. It's probably the 4th or 5th time, and I think I'd started a business. I think increasingly I learned the importance of finding the right investor.
Yeah, tough lessons learned. I'm sure there's all types out there. Listen, and just fast forwarding to today, then, what is your sense? I think and at South Summit we take a very positive viewpoint, right? I mean, we feel the urgency of the need for climate solutions. We're living it today ourselves with our sister event in Brazil, literally underwater. So we're making a huge effort to support them and a recovery plan for that and building resilience around climate change and climate-related catastrophes. But what is your sensation in the broader ecosystem around, are we getting there? Are we making progress? I mean, this is why we love highlighting companies like yourselves, because it gives everybody huge hope to see the progress and the speed at execution. But what's your sensation now heading into 2030 and looking at, European targets are 55 reduction in emissions, we're 9% behind.
Honestly,
like you were saying.
everything is the technology and the economics are so easy now, right? Look, we're seeing electric cars in China for less than $10,000, not subsidized, just because they invested early in the technology and the capabilities around the key, the requirements, batteries and software and so on. We're seeing the price of solar power is 10 times lower than it was in 2012. Look, the solar panels that go on your roof, sort of, 1 meter by 2 meters roughly, used to cost about 800 euros 10 years ago. They now cost about 80.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So the technologies to deliver an almost entirely clean energy system are kind of here.
Yeah.
But the markets and the regulation and the incumbents are kind of making that progress slower than it could be. And I think what we need to do is, first of all, keep demonstrating that consumers love these solutions. Right? Cheaper energy is the prize. Abundant cheaper energy. Look, when it's clean, you've got abundance. Globalized energy democracy, the 800 million people in the world that don't have access to clean energy, or the hundreds of millions of people that live in cities that are so heavily polluted that it kills 10 million people a year. All these problems are addressable, and we have those technologies. So I think the sort of the optimism in me is that we know we can do all this, but we've got this incredible battle on our hands. And that's not a conspiracy theory. It's just incumbents are always slow to change, even if they want to. And in regulated markets, you can't just set up an energy company and plug into the energy system and give people cheap energy. You can't just build wind farms. You can't even just build batteries. All this stuff is kind of hard to access, and so it makes the process of changing it slower and harder than I'd like. And I think 2023, 24 are pivotal because last year, in the run-up to COP, the key climate summit, for the first time, there started to be explicit conversations about phasing out fossil fuels. And I think that really woke the fossil fuel industry up to the reality that we can now look down that tunnel and know we can go without them.
Yeah.
And as a result, I think, you see all of these press articles and things in social media and online kind of criticizing the solutions, criticizing EVs for being too heavy. By the way, they only weigh 10%, 15% more than petrol cars.
Death gasps.
Criticizing them for catching fire. EVs are 60 times less likely to catch fire than petrol cars. Petrol's very explosive. Anyway, so what we've got to do, we innovators, entrepreneurs, and people who can put the climate first, but actually, recognize that the economics of this are better as well, is relentlessly bring the solutions that mean that citizens will increasingly embrace it, not just because it's good for the planet, because it's good for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you give me great hope talking about, that the entrepreneurs are relentlessly bringing solution after solution after solution, because that's nothing new. That's what entrepreneurs do. And I think the more that we can strengthen them and power them up, the quicker that we can make these transformations and face these challenges. So, Greg, well done. Thank you so much. You're giving us all hope. It's really exciting to see the momentum specifically in energy transition. And it looks like you guys are really leading the way on that. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for joining us on Deep Dive, and wish you very, very best of luck with bringing all the incumbents on board and accelerating this transformation.
And let me wish you the best of luck. South Summit is an entrepreneurial, it's actually, in itself is an entrepreneurial success story. So genuinely well done on your growth and the huge impact you have, by the way. I think the more we can foster the innovation, the spirit of we can do this,
Yeah.
the better it is. And so thank you for what you do.
Yeah, very, very welcome. We just want to power up the entrepreneurs and act as a catalyst, you know what I mean, to give them the energy, the space and the tools that they need to do the best work that they possibly can. So again, thank you so much. Wonderful to have you with us. Best of luck.
Thank you.